We can have a quick look at offtheball.com as well, I think, this morning. So, small grants are a political slush fund. Ivan Yates was on last night with Joe Malloy talking about how politicians treat the lottery ones. He was saying that the big ticket infrastructural funds are actually much more transparent, but that the smaller grants, anything under 100 grand, yeah, it's essentially a political slush fund. And he talked about his own machinations to make sure that the Tour de France, when it was in Ireland in 1999, ended up going through Enniscorthy. He had lobbied Bord Bia to make sure that they would put some money in. He got Bord Bia to threaten to withdraw the funding unless the race went back through Enniscorthy, and that's exactly how the Tour de France ended up going through Enniscorthy.
It's an amazing story.
Right.
Screw Festina for messing it all up for everybody.
Yeah. Right. Yesterday morning here on OTB AM, the Government Chief Whip and TD for Galway West, Sean Kine, joined us to talk about the awarding of 20 million to the sports grant. Now, a lot of people were in touch with us saying, why are you picking on Connacht? We're absolutely not picking on Connacht. Connacht deserve to have world-class facilities. It just turns out the IRFU are in a position to pay for them. So why does the taxpayer end up paying for them was the question. And if everybody agrees that the taxpayer should pay for them, then that's fine. But at the moment, we're just on this course where it's like, yeah, of course. We just take it as a matter of course and a matter of fact that the government gives money to sports organisations for stadiums. I'm not just convinced that it's the best use of our resources. We're going to speak with the UCC Director of Economics, John Considine, in a minute to tease this out a little bit. First, though, here's the Minister of State for Tourism and Sport, Brendan Griffin, talking to Off the Ball John Duggan yesterday about whether the IRFU should be paying for the sports grounds redevelopment, not taxpayers.
20 million is going to be given by the state to the redevelopment of the sports ground. Would you like to see the IRFU chip in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're in a position to do that. They should. Certainly, I would always see our role within the sports capital unit through the department as being to enable projects and to contribute to projects, but certainly not to, to be the people who provides them full stop. And in this regard, we know that this is at least a 30 million euro project, and of course that figure possibly with construction inflation and everything else, it could perhaps rise. But I think all of the national sporting bodies, already have committed a certain amount to various projects, but I'd like to see them give as much as they can. And if for example, if sporting bodies are in a position to give more, I think they should give more. But I think the Connacht Rugby story is a very special one. It's not that long ago, 2002. I remember I was a student in Galway at the time when people were talking about winding up Connacht Rugby, and it's now great to see them in the situation that they're in at the moment. And I think they have a really bright future as well. And I think that if the state can play a role in that, we should. Obviously, we shouldn't carry all the can, we shouldn't carry all the burden. But I think it's all about balance. And in fairness to the West, in terms of sporting infrastructure, we haven't seen any massive investment in the West of Ireland for quite some time. We've seen an awful lot in Dublin, we've seen an awful lot in Cork, we've seen Thomond Park, for example, in the past, and Limerick receive major funding. We haven't seen that in Galway.
John Considine, good morning to you. How you doing?
Good morning.
I just am not convinced that investing in large-scale sporting infrastructure is the best use of taxpayers' resources. And I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about this. Obviously, you know a lot about the way that the grants are handed out, and you've done great work in the past to kind of show how the grants follow the various ministers, irrespective almost of who's in power. So I suppose there's two issues really at play here, and I wanted just to hear what you thought about the role of the state in investing in sports infrastructure, particularly when it's the big ticket stuff that is going to be used for single sports.
Well, on that, I would in general be in favour of multi-sport use if it's coming from the state. But that's from as an outsider, so to speak. Everybody wants their own home. It was a bit strange to hear some of the arguments in the recent issues to do with the FAI to say that had they got a stadium when it was proposed back for the Berkeley Bowl, etc., that they wouldn't be in the mess they're in. In other words, we'd have another stadium, but the FAI wouldn't have gone into hock. So, the organisations and the individuals, even within the organisations, want their own projects. It's nearly like night follows day. If you look, Kildare wanted, why can't we have a match in Newbridge? Waterford, why can't we have games in Walsh Park? And, you end up building stuff that's run and used, fairly infrequently during the year. But it's almost a fact of life. The IRFU, want their venues. The GA want their venues. The FEI would also want their venues, but they have a funding problem. So, I suppose beggars can't be choosers in that respect.
I think you're dead right. And is there a role then for the government to step in and say no more funding for any individual sports? If you want funding, you have to partner up with another. And so, with another major body, we need to start seeing cooperation between the three big bodies, essentially.
Yes, and look, it might at this stage it might be enough even to get them to say, look, at least you could share them. I mean, have your facilities. Now, as somebody with a GA background, I know this would provoke a lot of hostility in the GA to opening grounds and so forth. But this is what comes if you take the money. This is what comes with it. And why build? When you see, if you watch games on television in Limerick in the Gaelic grounds, depending on how the camera pans, you can actually pick up the Munster rugby grounds in the background. You can see Thomond Park, and you kind of say, look, I know there's a different size pitch. I know all of this, but it's quite difficult to do. My understanding was that even when the Aviva was developed, it was supposed to have the dimensions big enough to hold a GA field. That was kind of part of the process of getting it going. But if you look at it, was that ever going to happen? It's a difficult task, but I do think, the government, and I think they will, as time goes by, people will say, look, resources are scarce. If we're going for these projects, we need some sort of cooperation between the organisations. Yeah, and there's a problem with size. When Crow Park was used for some of the internationals, people felt, particularly in the soccer internationals, they were very far away from the pitch. So, look, there are these issues and so forth. But if there's public funding involved, the public, I think the politicians can be a bit more forceful.
Can I ask you what you think the role of public funding should be when it comes to sport?
Well, I would say the public funding, from my professional background now, I would say needs to go to areas where we believe that this stuff should be provided, and not necessarily where we want to see the high-profile events. So, for example, maybe we should be televising, for example, the Special Olympics, and the Paralympics, but not necessarily the regular Olympics. Should we be paying to see, big events on television? Should we be paying for stuff that can already be paid for? But there's if the market provides it, why should the government be stepping in? But the question then, people will say, well, I'm paying my taxes. I want the following. Why should I be disadvantaged because we're paying taxes? We can afford it. Why should we be suffering? And the sports grounds in Galway is a prime example. People are saying, look, the IRFU can afford it, so therefore they shouldn't get it. Again, but I think the role, if you look at it purely from a public good perspective, money should be coming in from the government only in situations where we believe stuff should be provided. This is a value judgment. We believe stuff should be provided, but the market doesn't provide it.
How do you think that we should come to the conclusion about what should and shouldn't be provided?
Now you're into values, and now you're into the politics side of things. What do we believe should be provided? Should it be Gaelic games because it's Irish culture? And in fact, if you look at some of the European treaty and some of the guidelines on state aid, they do facilitate cultural events. They do allow you to spend in that context because it might keep the culture alive and so forth. But it really is, bottom line, it really is a judgment about what we want. What do we want to spend our money on? Do we want to spend our money on seeing our athletes compete at an elite level? Or do we want to spend it on participation? Or do we want to spend it, even the current arguments and debate is over, do we want to see it on capital versus do we want to put money into coaching? And some of that is even political because the capital spending has been kept within the department. The department makes the decisions, whereas the current spending, the spending on day-to-day funding of the organisations tends to go through the Sports Ireland. So that's a call that has to be made. I mean, we make that as citizens. I have a GA background. I would obviously like to see the GA being well funded, etc. But I think in general, sports people want sports funding to be more. But again, there's a call against that. If we fund more on sport, we can't do it elsewhere. And you'll see this in the debates that come up. Watch over the last year since the expose on greyhound racing, the number of times that non-sporting organisations have used that example to say, oh, we're not getting money and greyhound racing is getting money on. So this is all part of a thing that we need to sort out as citizens, as voters, as ordinary people, to say, look, where do we want money going? And if it's within sport, then we need to make those decisions ourselves as a go to participation. You see over the last couple of years, there's been a greater emphasis on money going to women in sport. So they're all decisions that need to be made, and they are being made. And made in general, I would think they're all going in the right direction. It's just probably a bit slower than we would all expect.
Right, okay, because I was going to ask John if perhaps the sports capital grants need to be looked at. I know it's something we've been speaking about for 20 years at this point, ever since the kind of inception of the sports capital grants, that the sports minister tends to, the money tends to go to the sports minister's constituency quite a bit. Is that just a small issue in the grander scheme of things, or do you think the entire thing needs to be looked at once a new government comes into play?
Well, I think you have to be careful that you'll ever think you're going to get to a solution. So I started this work years ago when there was a changeover in minister between Jim McDaid and John O'Donoghue, and I thought it was nice to show that, look, it was clear there that Donegal performed poorly when the minister went out, and Kerry performed better when the new minister came in. And it was a nice little experiment. It was handy for talking to students and saying, look, when you view politics, you can also look at it from an economics point of view, where there's a bit of self-interest involved here. It's not just about people going into politics purely for the public good. And it was just, I wouldn't say it was harmless research, but it was small enough. And I was delighted then when we got, a number of years later, we got Michael Ring, because now it allowed me to say that, it's not just those Fianna Fáil types that are always misallocating money or looking after themselves, but now it's, the opposition are doing it. Now politicians, of all the things you can lay at them, the worst possible criticism is they're the same as the other crowd. So I got a lot of people going, oh, we weren't like that, and it's different. But what you'll notice that happened after that, and particularly since Michael Ring took over, yes, they went to in one sense, a clearer route. Oh, we're going to do it per capita. But then what they did was they started divvying up and reclassifying stuff. So you got equipment-only grants, you separated the local and regional, you got resubmitted allocation grants, you got money funded under something else. So basically, what happened was they just kind of did it in a different way. So I think that element is always going to be there. And, it's a pity they don't publish, and I no doubt this would be quite easily done, publish by county the amount. At the moment, if you look online, you'll find it by individual club, which is great, but you don't get the county totals in the same clear and transparent way that you got previously. It could even be done by constituency. And once the transparency is there, it's easier, so to speak, for people to make their own judgment. They'll have an election coming up and they can decide, I don't like what was done or wasn't done. But we have a system in Ireland where we reward people at the local level. So if we come on here and we give out about a particular minister and we say that minister was they're only looking after their own constituency, there's people in the constituency going, wait, fair play. And, the rest of the constituency is giving out about it. But the election takes place at the local level. So, the minister actually even benefits from any controversy.
Yeah, like just as a final point then, John, it's an interesting point that you make there about how they've classified these funds, that there are new phrases coming up, like the large-scale sport infrastructure fund, for example, is perhaps a fund that a lot of people wouldn't have heard about until recently because it was set up quite recently, and it's a rather intelligent way of making sure that not a whole pile of questions are asked because it's not in one particular list, that they're actually spreading this out amongst a number of different funds.
Yes, and then what happens is we start tinkering at we say, how do we fix up this and how do we fix up that? And, there was even a lot of complaints about the sort of marking scheme. They were saying that because Dublin didn't have enough allocations, that maybe there was an easier marking scheme. But it's what we would expect. If you take a view of politics from an economics point of view, you don't get and presume that people are the same and they look after their own interests. Then what you say is, look, what you find is what you get, and it's not a surprise, so to speak. Whereas it's a sort of a less romantic view of politics, and you're saying, look, this is what's going to happen, and they will try to find ways around it if you stop it. In time, you would hope it would get a bit better, but I wouldn't lose too much sleep if it doesn't improve even in my own lifetime.
Right, John. Great to have you with us this morning. Thanks very much for clearing all that up for us.